So I'm going to move right along to introduce Christine Conn. Christine, if you could come on video and set up your presentation. Christine Conn is the director of the Chesapeake and Coastal Service, Maryland Department of Natural Resources. Christine directs the Chesapeake and Coastal Service of the Maryland DNR. The service provides technical assistance, state and federal funding, training, information, tools, and science to provide nature-based solutions for healthy ecosystems, resilient communities, and vibrant economies. So Christine, we're seeing your slide. It's not in presentation mode yet, but we do see it up.
Not in presentation mode yet. Weird, because I always see it in presentation mode. How does that look?
We're still seeing your slide view mode. You might want to check the selection that you made to see if you selected presentation as opposed to another screen.
Let me try this again.
That looks good.
Okay, let's go with it then.
Good job.
All right. Well, thank you, Jordan. Yeah, I'm eager to talk about some of that science translation and how we use that information at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. Back in 2010, we developed a policy, Building Resilience to Climate Change, which effectively systemically integrated climate change across multiple planning and program functions in the department. So statewide forest and wildlife plans, our Chesapeake Bay watershed implementation plans, coastal zone plans, funding criteria, restoration design, the whole gamut. Resiliency initiatives, land conservation. So what I wanted to do today was to kind of walk all of you through one of our science to application pathways. And for the past 20 years at DNR, I've worked heavily in land conservation. So this is a project that I've worked personally on. And so I'm going to take you through our science to implementation pathway. So we know, of course, a foundation in strong science is critical for driving natural resource management decisions. And what I'm going to go through over the next couple of slides are some of the modeling and assessment tools that we've developed that we use to better integrate climate change with our programs. And there are links wherever I could plug a link into the document presentation. I did provide that, so you can do a deeper dive into the technical aspects of the work. I'm just going to touch on it and really focus on how we're using the science. Back in 2012, we did run the sea level affecting marsh model to look at wetland adaptation areas. And we did a couple different scenarios, 2050, 2100. And then we took that information, and I'm not going to go into any detail because we've heard a lot about the SLAM model, so I know folks are very familiar with it. So of course, we mapped these out, and then we started to prioritize these features based on certain habitat features, such as diversity, marsh bird habitat, etc. And we categorize these into 3 different buckets, these wetland migration areas: low, medium, and high priority wetland adaptation areas based on a number of different criteria, size as well. There were a variety of different factors we looked at in this prioritization. We then take out the medium and the high areas, and we incorporate that in our land acquisition scoring. And I'm going to get into a little more detail in terms of how we do that. And these medium and high value wetland adaptation areas are also included in our land conservation targeting criteria. I'm going to talk in a little more detail about our coastal resilience easements and the presence of new wetland migration areas on land, on a property that we're considering for the easement, is the key eligibility criteria. So we're really focused on what we see through the modeling work done here on those properties. We've also completed a coastal resilience assessment. We developed this in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy, and this prioritizes areas for restoration and conservation based on the potential for natural features like wetlands to reduce risk from waves and water. And I saw a lot of similarities with some of the work that VIMS is doing that Pam Mason presented. So we generated a number of data products from this. We look at flood-prone communities by identifying residential areas and ranking risk based on probability of flooding, population density, and social vulnerability. We also look at shorelines that are prone to coastal flooding and erosion, and that's represented by a shoreline hazard index. That maps factors such as elevation, storm surge height, relative sea level rise projections, historic erosion rates, and sediment type. We also identify shorelines where coastal habitats buffer the coast, and that's represented by a habitat role map. We use all of these data sets in that final fourth slide on the bottom right that I'm looking at to identify shoreline priority areas. So this is kind of a synergistic merged map that helps us look at where important areas are for conservation and where important areas are for restoration, both for habitat value and for community resilience. We're also embarking on a new project that's starting to wrap up with George Mason University and the Nature Conservancy. It is the ecological effects of sea level rise, and we're monitoring water levels, waves, and currents at select sites. The outputs of this is to quantify wave attenuation and flood reduction benefits of wetlands now and in the future as sea level rises. And we'll also be looking at the buffering capacity of wetlands under various storm conditions and management actions and sea level rise scenarios. It's really going to expand our ability to not only update our SLAM modeling, but also look at some of the ecological resiliency benefits that these wetlands provide under current and future conditions. And we'll be wrapping this new update as well into some of our land conservation and restoration work. Another very cool product that I'm very psyched about that we've had at the Department of Natural Resources for quite a while is the Accounting for Maryland's Ecosystem Services. And this is an economic valuation of ecosystem services for all of the state's natural land areas. They also reflect, the analysis also reflects variation in ecosystem services provided by habitat type and geographic location. So it's basically a statewide geospatially explicit assessment of Maryland's ecosystem services. And I'll show you how we work that into a parcel evaluation tool where we actually provide economic value for every single parcel based on the habitat features that it has, and then the 7 different ecosystem services that we're quantifying that you see up there on the screen. And again, there's a lot of in-depth information in terms of the valuation approaches we used for this that you can find on our website. So we've got all this great information, and now we need to work on delivering it. So I'm going to jump into how we deliver decision support data. And I think most of us know that the decision makers are rarely the science makers, and part of our charge is to translate and communicate this information in a way to inspire confidence, accountability, and transparency. So the Coastal Atlas is one of our tools for doing that, and it delivers decision support data to meet the unique needs of the coastal management community. So it provides coastal data. It also provides various tools, case study applications, and information that coastal communities need to turn data into useful information. Now we touch on green print, and this is something that I've worked on for many, many years. This is a targeting tool. It was launched in 2008. And the green print itself is a platform that guides land conservation actions. And this is heavily used by our other governmental and nonprofit partners in land conservation. What it does is it identifies targeted ecological areas, and those are areas that you see mapped in light green. And these are the most ecologically valuable areas in the state, based on a number of different resource assessments that occur throughout the department. So we look at aquatic and terrestrial biodiversity. We have a green infrastructure ecological network assessment. We look at water quality benefits. We look at areas where there are important fisheries, both inland and coastal. And we also incorporate climate resilience benefits. And this map and this data is directly used by our Board of Public Works for funding decisions. And I'll show you how we work this into a scorecard that they evaluate. And another feature of this map is that it shows not only where we want to work and we want to expand our state conservation funds, but it also creates a platform that's accountable and transparent and ecologically defensible for spending the state public dollar. So it's been a very successful and useful platform for us. This is our parcel evaluation tool. You can get to it from that Greenprint website. And this allows us to do a conservation benefit assessment for any parcel in the state. So there's a little widget you can click on. You can click on a parcel, and the report card incorporates all of the ecological information that we use to move a project forward. And we created a 5-star system. This is for external users like land trusts and other conservation partners to help communicate that a little bit better. And we developed this actually specifically for our partners who need to document the value of the properties that they are putting easements on for tax purposes, for accreditation, and other internal needs. So we're able to provide this defensible ecological valuation for those partners through this tool. So you get a conservation benefits assessment, and here, where I mentioned the ecosystem service assessment, you also get a breakdown of the economic value of a variety of those services that I went over. And you can look at it on a per parcel basis, and you can also evaluate it on an acreage basis. So I ran a parcel evaluation on this one property that is coastal, has a significant amount of wetlands, and we're able to attribute a very high biodiversity and wildlife service as a result of those wetlands to that property, and also stormwater and flood mitigation services. So it's kind of a handy tool to get a quick snapshot of what we believe these properties are providing based on their features. So when we're considering a parcel for conservation, we incorporated data into this formal quantifiable scorecard that we use internally to decide whether or not we want to move forward. We look at ecological benefits, public access and land management benefits, and I wanted to point out a couple of areas where we directly incorporate climate resilience benefits. I mentioned the sea level rise wetland adaptation areas. Those, if a property possesses those, they get a certain number of points for ecological value. And we also look at, this is one of the products from the Coastal Resilience Assessment, which is the Marsh Protection Index. And those are evaluated based on the value that those habitats have for protecting inland communities. And that's incorporated in the lower people section of our scorecard. Now, the coastal resiliency easement, this was first, we did our first easement in 2013. We just completed our second project in 2021. This new initiative that we're really just starting to get our heads around and starting to implement builds on a standard easement provision. There are a number of properties, obviously, in the state that don't fall within our Greenprint targeted ecological area, or don't have public land management benefits. But we do recognize that many of these properties are critical to allow for wetland migration and sustainable coastal ecosystems. So the key here with these easements is that all of our easements have standard provisions: 100-foot stream buffer, soil conservation, water quality plan. There's no conversion of woodland areas. So there's those sorts of, and protection for existing wetlands. What the easement does, the new element here, is that it requires the implementation of a coastal resiliency management plan within 2 years. Thank you. And this coastal resiliency management plan is really the key to looking at what we need to do on the property. And it allows us also to evolve that coastal resiliency management plan over the future. Our current coastal resiliency management plan delineates a wetland adaptation buffer. So the property has to have new marsh migration areas. So we delineate that adaptation buffer based on sea level rise projections, the SLAM model, any field indicators, and then we apply management recommendations within the buffer. So the particular project that we just did required no conversion of wetlands, no fertilizer, pesticides. We looked at any restoration opportunities, seeding and planting guidance, control of Phragmites and other invasives. And I kind of highlight this in red because this is a big science question for us. It's a huge marsh management question for us. And we know that the more projects that we take on, the more questions we're going to have, because every property is unique and we're going to be looking at very different conditions from property to property. So we're very interested in looking at what we might think of as some, standard best practices really for marsh management, depending on what we see out there. Another unique aspect of the Coastal Resiliency Management Plan is that we update it at least every 10 years. So it requires an update so that we can look at changes to the ecology of the property, any flooding impacts. We can incorporate new projections, new science on management techniques, any unforeseen issues, because really, we can project what we'll see in 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, but we need to be ready to be adaptive and responsive when we go out to the land and see what the land needs. Again, so I point this out as both science issues and also, policy needs, because, we're going to be running into structures as sea level rise and other unforeseen issues. So we're just really starting off on that. The final thing I wanted to point out was we're also kicking off a new initiative that we are naming the targeted resiliency areas. So we're identifying a number of landscape geographic areas across the state where we're going to dive in and do some very focused land planning, strategic planning to develop a portfolio of projects within that area that work together to generate climate resiliency benefits, but also generate the water quality, the greenhouse gas, carbon sequestration benefits, the habitat benefits, all of the co-benefits that we know our natural nature-based projects can generate. And the attempt, that the desire here is to, create a landscape scale plan where we're avoiding those random acts of restoration and conservation, generate a project portfolio that is ready to go and respond to new initiatives, federal funding coming in, excess state funding that needs to be spent at the end of the year. We'll run it through our existing grant programs. But we feel very strongly that having this project portfolio in hand in these various geographies are going to help us just become a lot more nimble.
Christine, I'm going to need to ask you to wrap up pretty quick here so that we can.
All righty. This is my last slide. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. and just say thank you, and we'll move on.